Well, I suppose I've stuck my neck out a lot of times. I find that life's a lot more fun when you say yes than when you say no. Sometimes you fall flat in your face if you do it that way, but sometimes you've just got to make a decision, get on and give it a go. And you have to be a little bit brave and maybe even foolish to do that. And fortunately, we've sort of got away with it more often than we haven't.
We are excited to have Sir Richard Branson, founder of Virgin Group, here with us today to light the Empire State Building.
He's a rock star within the business world.
New York means a lot to me. I first flew Virgin Atlantic in here 35 years ago with one second-hand 747.
Richard Branson is one of the bravest people I've ever met.
We've launched airships from here.
He does not let himself be limited by what came before.
We've launched balloons from here.
He certainly doesn't let other people define him.
We announced the launch of our spaceship company in New York.
This guy's unique. There's not a lot of Richard Bransons out there.
Do us the honor of actually lighting the tower for us.
He's way ahead of his time.
Along with that comes a rationality, an intelligence,
2,
energy, hard work.
3.
I'm delighted to say that's the Virgin Racing Class.
I think Richard's childhood was absolutely key in making him who he is today.
His father was in the Desert Rats during the Second World War, fighting as a tank commander.
His mother, Eve, had a huge influence on him.
My mum is a very adventurous person. She very much felt that she wanted us to stand on our own 2 feet and not to be mollycoddled, as she would call it.
She was one of the world's first ever air stewardesses on an aircraft.
And there was the moment when I was 4 that we were going to Granny's house in Devon, and about 3 miles before we got there, I think I must have been misbehaving or something in the back of it. She just pushed me out of the car and said, right, you make your own way there.
Right from a very early age, he was a classic schoolboy adventurer and would go places where others would fear to tread. At age 10, myself and Richard, but really Richard, was trying to make extra money to increase his pocket money more than anything else, and he kept on coming up with ideas.
Somebody told me that budgerigars bred a lot, and so I thought, well, if I get a pair of budgerigars and they breed quickly.
We built a cage and we bought the budgerigars, and indeed they did breed, but we had to go away to school, and when we came back, the cat, so to speak, had got them, so it wasn't a hugely successful venture.
So then we tried Christmas trees, because for every foot a Christmas tree grows, you could get a pound a foot. We planted a lot of Christmas trees, and the rabbits got in and ate them all. So our first 2 business ventures weren't very successful.
We just learned bit by bit that you can take risks, but also you need to protect yourself a little bit from the things that can happen.
And it was the 60s, the young people wanted a voice.
Through cheering crowds of hundreds of thousands, Princess Margaret rides to Westminster Abbey on her wedding day.
Like a malignant growth, the wall sprouted inside Berlin.
3,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet, you guessed it, the Beatles.
How long do you expect to be here?
When I was about 14, the Vietnamese War started. We decided to start a magazine to campaign against it, a magazine to give a voice to young people.
It was an original idea because there was no national magazine for students. We were having to sell advertising, we were having to attract big contributors, and again, that took a lot of guts.
Yeah, I was working out of the school phone box where you had to put money in, so instead of putting the money in, I just rang up the operator and said I'd put the money in. The operator became my secretary. Hello, I have Mr. Branson for you. and that'll go straight through to Coca-Cola or Pepsi without paying. I soon learned the art that if I let Coke know that Pepsi were definitely in, that Coke would then jump in, and my education started. It was an exciting time, and the headmaster called me in one day and said, either you leave school and run the magazine, or you stop running the magazine and you stay at school. And so I said, thank you for that choice. I'm off to run the magazine.
Richard made an incredibly bold move to leave school. Obviously, his parents didn't want him to leave, but he made the decision that he just wasn't learning there.
I'm dyslexic, so I was hopeless at conventional schooling. I remember walking around the garden with my dad. The first time I walked around, he tried to persuade me out of it. Then the second time round, he said, look, if you've really made up your mind on reflection, when I left college at 22, I had no idea what I wanted to do. You're 15, you know what you want to do. So give it a go, and if it doesn't succeed, we'll try to get you an education again. And I could have given him the biggest kiss ever for his understanding.
He left school at 15, and his headmaster said when he left school, Branson, you're either going to become a millionaire or go to jail.
And all he had was a bunch of mates around him. None of them really knew how to start a business. None of them really knew how to run a magazine. And they managed to secure great names in terms of Vanessa Redgrave, Mick Jagger, to participate in this magazine.
The student magazine was profitable in the end, but it was proving a tough battle, and we were really looking for other ways to make money.
He looked at the mail order business, he saw that you could buy records cheaper, and he was like, okay guys, this is going to be our next venture.
I was sitting in a basement with a bunch of girls. We were all about 15, 16 years old. We were trying to think of a name for a mail order company. And then one of the girls said, we're all virgins. Why did you call it Virgin?
We all went, yes.
Virgin sounded good, so we went with Virgin.
That is a great name. It's fresh, it hasn't been done before. In those days, it's slightly risque. Well, actually very risque.
The registry office wouldn't register the name. I got out the dictionary and I looked up the word virgin, pure, untouched, unblemished. So I sent all these words to the registry office, and finally they relented and registered the brand.
So we were basically the first people to go in and offer discounted records at cheaper prices than anybody could get elsewhere.
So what happened was we had an order for records from Belgium. We were very excited, our first export order for music, and we drove down. The authorities said, you don't have a carnet. Drove back to England, and we suddenly thought, well, the authorities will assume that we've exported them. We could sell them in England and we won't have to pay the 35% tax. And foolishly, we did that. And then we did it again, and then we got caught.
He ended up in jail overnight. His mother, Eve, came to him, and she had to put the family home up for mortgage so that he could come out on bail. And ever since then, he said he learned his biggest lesson.
Fortunately, I was still a teenager, and it taught me it's better to sleep well at nights than take on authority.
And then that almost came to a very sad end because there was a mail order strike, so we had to find a way to keep going.
I'd heard a tape of a 15-year-old, and I thought somebody must put this out. He didn't have any vocals on it, and I took it to 8 record companies, and all of them said they liked it, but they wouldn't put it out without singing on it. So I thought, screw it, let's do it. We'll form a record company.
Going out with a record that had no lyrics, no song structure, was hugely risky. We had sort of protected ourselves to an extent by recording it in our own studios, doing everything on a very low-cost basis, so that if it didn't work, we would be fine.
This young lad who made the record was called Mike Oldfield, and the album was called Tubular Bells. It became one of the best-selling albums of the decade. And then we got a little bit of the music into The Exorcist, and that got it to #1 in America, and it really sort of helped kickstart the record label.
So he would pick the artists that he felt were innovative, and of course he signed on the Sex Pistols.
From my point of view, I feel that we're like some contagious disease.
Which at the time, you couldn't get more rebellious, more revolutionary than that.
Classic stupidity.
We've done a lot of really fun challenges. We decided to try to be the first to cross the Atlantic in a hot air balloon. Everything went wrong. I've been pulled out of the sea 4 or 5 times by helicopters. I think some of these sort of adventure things have helped give Virgin that sort of exciting image, which really sort of sets it apart from someone like British Airways or other people that we compete with. I mean, when I was 15, 16, I had nothing to lose. I had no mortgage, didn't have children, so perfect time to take a risk and stick your neck out.
To give away that much money for nothing, classic stupidity.
So he would pick the artists that he felt were innovative, and of course he signed on the Sex Pistols, which at the time, you couldn't get more rebellious, more revolutionary than that. And that's how he wanted to create the brand. He wanted them to stand out from all the other record companies by saying, we are for the young people, we are hip, we are trendy, and we are going to set boundaries.
We needed to get profile, and one of the great ways to get profile is to do things that are attention-getting. So we were always looking at ways to get the Virgin name in front of people.
I think the thing that put Virgin on the map was when we bought one second-hand 747. We took on British Airways, Pan Am, TWA, with their hundreds of planes.
It was a genuinely disruptive thing to do. The airline industry was totally regulated in the 1980s. And people just didn't start airlines because the big monopolistic US national carriers and European state-owned carriers, had normally destroyed any opposition.
People thought we were absolutely off our heads.
One could almost say mad.
A lot of my friends thought, my God, well, why are you going to work there? That's the guy that's just started the airline. It's never going to work. All he's got is a record company.
People who ran the record company were distraught. Why was I going to put this very successful record company at risk and go into the airline business?
Every day there were things happening that were putting at risk what was already being done. So all of the time you sort of feel the whole thing could collapse like a pack of cards.
I hated flying on other people's airlines. I mean, particularly British Airways. They were stuffy, boring.
So of course when he went head-to-head with British Airways, he had to really pull out everything that he had, and they wanted to get rid of him, they wanted to get rid of Virgin, and there was Richard. It was a David and Goliath situation.
They launched the Dirty Tricks campaign against us to try to drive us out of business, and went to extraordinary lengths to try to put us out of business. We somehow survived. I mean, we took them to court, and it did mean that I had to sell my record company in order to make sure that we had the financial muscle to combat them.
We've got the £560 million, which we can then spend on building up our newer companies, and in particular, I suppose, the airline and trying to make sure that can compete on a worldwide basis.
Richard was a rare breed in a world that had been dominated by socialist politics and then dominated by Thatcherism in the early part of it. He was an entrepreneur that had come through in the 70s, and there weren't many of them around.
We won the biggest libel damages in history. It was a turning point for Virgin Atlantic. I think British Airways realised that messing with us, that we would fight.
So while his company are taking risks and also attracting all the young people, he himself is actually representing what his brand is, and that's adventure.
He wasn't one of these sort of back-seat adventurers who would simply fund things, because he thought having his personality at the front of it was actually good for the business, and it was.
They had set a record pace since leaving New York City Monday.
We decided to bring the Blue Ribbon Cup back from America to England by seeing if we could be the fastest boat across the Atlantic.
There he was, out at sea, doing something very dangerous while his wife was pregnant with a second child.
Well, we sank about 2/3 of the way across. Yeah, one of the most emotional moments I had was actually when we did get rescued out of the sea by this banana boat, and this lady came up. She said, "Did you know that you have a son?" I said, "No. Would you like to see a picture of him?" And there she shows me a picture of him on the front page of the paper.
Well, I know it created a lot of tension between him and especially Joan, who he's been with for decades, that he would go on risking things while having young children and now having grandchildren.
Sometimes he wrote letters to them, what happens if he didn't quite make it? He wrote these very personal letters to his wife, to his children, just in case.
If you have children and you want to, push the limits, are you being selfish?
All I know is that family is really important to him. Balancing that with the things that he likes to do and the things he wants to achieve is not easy.
Is it daring, is it bravery, or is it because when we cover it, we're going to mention the Virgin name?
Richard, of course, loved challenges. He wants to put the Virgin brand on all sorts of industries. And of course, with trains in the United Kingdom, they didn't have a very good image.
British Rail was awful. I mean, the experience was ghastly. They needed new trains, they needed better management.
And he wanted to change that. He wanted to put that Virgin brand on that. He wanted to put the fun into trains. And he felt this is what the industry needed.
So I had the head of British Rail over to my house, and he said to the person next to him, I'm not going to let that Branson get hold of our trains. We realised that talking to him was not going to work, so we then contacted the government and said, we're willing to stick our necks out and create a great train service if you privatise part of the train network.
He didn't have a fear of failure, and I think not having a fear of failure is at the heart of entrepreneurialism.
Some things are going to work out, some things are not.
Virgin Cola, Virgin Brides, there have been some failures.
And when that happens, he is very practical. He realises that the number one thing you have to think about is the brand overall.
And at the right timing to actually leave those kind of businesses, he's been absolutely right on.
If the writing's on the wall, the sooner you do it, the better. You can then use the money that you save by doing it to start new businesses and create new things. The howling and the shaking was horrendous. We were in this bunker for 5 hours. No way I would have left. I've been lucky to have sort of wonderful moments. Being knighted was lovely because my parents were alive, and it's lovely to be able to share something like that with them. I love sporting events, and crossing the English Channel with my children, them being the fastest, me being the oldest. It's great. I've now got to an age where I can win all the oldest prizes. That's good.
Hurricane Irma began tearing through the Caribbean overnight.
The howling and the shaking was horrendous.
This is the latest on Irma. Category 5 storm still. That's the only thing that's remained constant.
We were in this bunker for 5 hours.
185 mile per hour winds. It's moving west-northwest.
First of all, we have 70 staff who were staying, so there's no way I would have left.
Because of course we were all saying, should they be staying?
Secondly, we have a wonderful community in the British Virgin Islands. There were thousands of people who were far greater at risk than we were.
Richard is a calculated risk taker.
Thirdly, it's my home, and it's I've loved the BVI since I was since we bought it when I was 27 years old.
The powerful storm cut a deadly path of destruction through the region, flattening entire communities.
And to see your home destroyed, and to see your island denuded, of plant life and everything, it must be just a terrible, terrible thing. But he's stepping up, he's trying to mobilize the global community to help out and to come together.
So when he finds problems like that, he naturally wants to get involved in them, and I don't think it's out of any sense of the brand or him in any way self-promoting his own position there. It's just because he knows that when you become well known, you do have a power to at least make an argument on behalf of others who aren't so well known.
If the Virgin Islands are hit by a hurricane, you can't turn your head. If you feel that you can help resolve conflicts in the world by creating an organisation with Nelson Mandela called the Elders, you've got to do it.
I mean, he's always had a strong sense as an individual of the imperative of people standing up for what they believe in.
He has the Carbon War Room. He has ocean conservation. He's involved with so many different projects around the world.
If something catches his eye, that is through whatever the magic Richard Branson calculator going on in there that's special or new or exciting, he's going to go after it.
You should see his schedule. He's at the UN, he's at the B team, working with other leaders on ways we can create better workplaces. He's in meetings with the team here, and then he's meeting with the investment team on all the different businesses they have and the businesses they're going to create.
We're going to inspire people to experience something that they would never have had the opportunity to experience. I think our move into space has been our boldest move.
For us at Virgin at the time, if we could develop a space launch system capable of launching satellites and science into space and fund it without any government money using space tourism, this was really exciting stuff.
That's a risk, right? That's a big business risk. But I think it'd be much more a risk if he didn't do that. Can you imagine the Virgin brand without trying to go to space?
Travels beyond our world. Richard Branson is the guy behind everything Virgin, the old record stores, the airline, and now space travel, at least as close as you can get. For a price, $200,000.
So I was very excited about that, and I wanted to be a part of it, and so my wife and I decided to buy a couple of tickets. We're inspired by how space represents the best of humanity, in a way. Courage, cooperation, discovery, wonder, awe.
I think that if it hadn't been for a tragic accident that happened, they would have been flying commercially by now.
The dream of civilians soaring into space as paying passengers could be on hold tonight after the deadly crash of a Virgin Galactic space plane.
It was a dreadful day.
Richard emailed me that he was coming to Mojave immediately after I let him know what had happened. So there was no hesitation.
He knew that that's what he had to do because, you know, if you're the boss of a business and someone has died on your watch, you are ultimately responsible for at least finding out what happened.
One of the pilots was able to parachute out and was injured. The other did not get out alive.
The accident was a terrible moment for all of us, and we continue to think of the families of the guys who were involved.
I was not sure whether we would continue. It was only when I got to the Mojave Desert and talked to the sort of many of the 700 astronauts who'd signed up. When I found out that it wasn't a technical problem, we decided to press on.
He was very strong that we needed to continue, and that was a key moment. And I think, a moment that represents his bravery.
Virgin Galactic, SpaceX, Blue Origin. I mean, note, it's Elon Musk, it's Richard Branson, it's Jeff Bezos. Why are these people investing in space? They are the presages of an industrial revolution in space that's coming very quickly, which will almost surpass everything you've seen in the internet over the past 25 years. If there's a complex problem, Richard thinks about the end solution. And he thinks about not so much the minutiae of how we get there, he'll find good people to do that, but he gives them a clear vision of where we want to get to at the end of that journey.
I learned the art of delegation early on. I think I'm good at finding good people and motivating them, and people seem to like working for Virgin.
The stuff that he keeps in touch with me on is comprehensive vis-a-vis the space business. So he's on top of all the big issues. What I don't get until I'm in the car with him, listening to him make like a series of calls, is that he's like doing that for 30 different companies.
Richard has a super clear vision for what he wants. The number one thing he will say to us is it enough fun?
There's always a first time for everything.
That's right.
That's why I'm a virgin, I suppose.
So all of the things you read in the kind of textbooks of good management, he kind of naturally had lots of those in his personality. He wasn't the shouty boss, he was the thinking boss.
He represents actually what we're trying to bring to other people, the spirit of giving it a go and getting out there and living life and going for it in life.
That is the ethos of Virgin, to take a challenge on.
He just has always been at the edge of pushing the next thing.
Wherever he goes around the world, people recognize him, they want to be part of him, and they also want to learn from him.
He just was brave enough to see things through his own eyes and probably the biggest lesson is for most people, if they did that, who knows what potential they might unlock.
You do only live once, and if you're capable of doing some extraordinary things, you should get out and try to do them. Foolishly, I'm as busy as ever, but enjoying it as much as ever.